Okay, good morning. So we will talk about, we'll discuss the different features of the Indian Constitution today. First up, India has one of the bulkiest constitutions in the world, which means it has about 395 articles, 22 parts and 12 schedules. Up until 2019, we have had about 104 amendments to the Constitution. Now, this is a very this is a very elaborate constitution. Okay, it's written, it's detailed, every schedules, articles, provisions, all of this has been discussed in detail, and it is duly enacted by the Constitution Assembly of India. So this Constitution Assembly of India took about 2 years, 11 months and 18 days to write and enact this constitution. Now, what about the flexibility and rigidity associated with the constitution? So there are different kind of constitutions in the world. Okay, some of them are very rigid, some of them are flexible. So in India, it is a mix of both rigidity and flexibility. Okay, some parts of the constitution can be easily amended, while some other parts it's very difficult to amend them. Okay, now some parts of the constitution can be amended by a simple majority. What is a simple majority? No, 2/3 is different. Okay, simple majority is what? If 40 people have voted for something, and if there is like 50 people who have voted for something, yeah, exactly. But some parts of the constitution to be amended, for some part of the constitution to be amended, you need about 2/3 majority. Okay, not just 2/3 majority in the parliament, not less than half of the one half of the state legislatures as well. It's only through when you have both. Okay, when you have 2/3 majority in the parliament as well as not less than one half of the state legislatures, only then you can amend some parts of the constitution. Next up, so let's look into this amendment procedure a little bit in detail. So Article 368 of the Constitution provides for two special methods of amendments. First one, that's the simple majority one. Okay, most of the provisions of the Constitution can be amended by the Union Parliament by passing an amendment bill by a majority of total membership. Okay, and 2/3 majority of the members present and voting in each of its two houses. So a simple majority, which is maximum number of people voting for something. Secondly, not just we have to have 2/3 people of both the houses should be present while this bill is being passed, and they should be voting as well. Next up, for the some of this is coming to the more difficult part, you have to follow a rigid method. Let's see how the rigid method is. Under it, first the bill is passed by the Union Parliament with a majority of the total membership and 2/3 majority of members present and voting in each house. Subsequently, it goes to the state legislatures. Then the state legislatures have to ratify this. The amendment gets passed only when it is passed by not less than one half of the several states of the union. So what are the federal units in India? The state governments, right? Not less than one half of them in the Indian Union should have passed it along with a 2/3 majority in the parliament. That is when you get the rigid sections of the constitution amended. So Indian constitution is partly rigid and partly flexible. Up next, Indian constitution is self-made and enacted constitution, which means no one else has given it to us. Okay, the Indian constitution is a constitution made by the people of India, acting through their duly elected and representative body. Who was this who were this representative body? The Constitution Assembly, right? They were indirectly elected, and it was organized in December 1946. We have already, when I discussed that introductory sessions to the Constitution, we already heard that the first session was held on 9th of December 1946. Next up, the preamble of the Constitution. We have already discussed this. This is a well drafted document. Okay, it goes into all kinds of details. It states the philosophy of the Constitution. It declares India to be something. What is it? India is a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic. The words socialist and secular were added to the Constitution later by the 42nd Amendment. Now, the Constitution, the preamble says that the Indian Constitution is committed to providing for its citizens what? Justice, liberty and equality for the people, and of promoting a certain feeling of fraternity among its citizens, so thereby protecting the dignity of the individual and as well as the unity and integrity of the nation. Okay, and the preamble is a kind of a key to the Constitution. Okay, even if you don't look at all the other provisions in the Constitution, if you look at the preamble in detail, you can understand what this Constitution is about. What does it stand for? What ideas does it represent? What is its philosophy? What are the virtues and values that it upholds? Now, it's also very evident that this, if you look at the preamble, it becomes very evident that this is a Constitution which is committed to the welfare of the people, to the service of the people. Next up, in India, it's obvious, we have a democracy. All of us have democratic rights. All of you vote, don't you? Right? Now, in India, we have what is called as a parliamentary democracy. Okay? Now, Article 74 and 75 deal with the parliamentary system at the center, and Articles 163 and 164 deals with the parliamentary system at the states. Now, Article 74 and the parliamentary government is also known as the cabinet government. Okay, and why is it known as the cabinet government? Because there is a concentration. Who is the executive in India at the Union, at the center? The Prime Minister and the Council of Ministers. And there is a certain concentration of power with them, right? Okay, so there is a certain concentration of power in their hands, and this is why the parliamentary system of government in India is also known as a cabinet government. Now, we also have a mixture of federalism and unitarism. Okay, it simply means that there is division of power between the center and the states. Okay. Now, while describing India as a union of states, the Constitution provides for a federal structure with a unitary spirit. So, Constitution experts refer to India as a quasi-federation, a federation with a unitary bias, which means what? The union has some more powers, okay, a primacy over the federal units in a lot of matters. Now, like a federation, the Constitution of India provides for a division of powers between the center and the states. It provides for a written, rigid and supreme constitution. There is an independent judiciary, right? We all have an independent judiciary with the Supreme Court at the top, and this judiciary is also given the power to settle the disputes between the center and the state, and of course, we have the central administration. That's what I meant by saying that, when you say that there is both federalism and when there is unitarism in India, means it just simply means that we have a central government, but we also have a state government. We also have several state governments. How many states are there in India? 28. So we have 28 state governments and 9 union territories. So there is distribution of power. So we have both a very strong center as well as we have all these federal units with powers of their own. Now, so that is how you have a mixture of unitarism and federalism. Now, Indian constitution is a constitution which is being drawn from several sources. In formulating the constitution of India, the founding fathers used several sources like, the national movement, the freedom struggle, right? We have been under colonial rule for a really long time, and that taught us several important lessons. Okay, so we have taken these values that we learned during the freedom struggle to the making of the constitution. We realized, that colonial oppression, what are the problems that we faced because of colonial oppression? What were the problems which were created? Like the British had this divide and rule policy, which led to, which increased communalism in India. Okay, there are certain economic policies caused a lot of hardship to a lot of people in India. Similarly, we have also seen the presence of certain social evils otherwise, and so you've gone through all this. Like people like, if you look into the negotiations between Ambedkar and Gandhi and others, you can see how this whole period of freedom struggle has been a learning period for the framers of the constitution. They have seen the hardships, they've seen the possibilities, they've seen the problems, and now, so as soon as India is about to get independence, they want to create a constitution in which whatever lessons they learned from this can be applied to, can be incorporated in. Now, similarly, I already told you that the Government of India Act 1935, which was one of the important legislations by the British government in India for the rule of India. From this Government of India Act 1935 also, we have taken a lot of provisions, which has significantly influenced the current constitution of India. Now, not just these internal sources as in the spirit of freedom struggle and the values which have been gained from the freedom struggle, we have also taken from the several acts which were brought in by the British. Now, why do we borrow from the British themselves if they have been behind all this oppression that we have gone through? It's because we had to have, there was this principle of continuity. Okay, you don't want to bring in something which is so drastically different, okay, so that it confuses people, it causes a lot of ambiguity, it brings in a lot of unfamiliarity. We don't want all that. They wanted to create a constitution which had a spirit of continuity, but to suit the Indian conditions. So that's why how we end up borrowing the parliamentary system with bicameral legislatures from the British Constitution. Okay. Similarly, from the US, from the United States, we have taken republicanism, independence of judiciary, the judicial review power, and the Bill of Rights. Now, similarly, some of the people who were in power in India immediately after independence, they looked into several countries in the world which were doing really well. Okay, they were doing economically well, politically they were democratic. So when they looked at all of these countries, they felt like, okay, maybe we can borrow something from these people. Okay, we can borrow from these people and incorporate some of their provisions into our constitution and tweak it to suit the Indian scenario. So that's how we, take 5-year plans from the USSR. We take directive principles of state policy from the Irish Constitution, so on and so forth. Now, this is really important for anyone who studies constitution. The idea that India has a single integrated judiciary, okay, which means this judiciary is common both for the union as well as for the states. So you don't have separate courts. So there are high courts in the states, okay, but at the end they are part of the integrated court system, which means there is the Supreme Court above them. Okay, so you have Supreme Court at the apex level, high courts at the state level, and other courts which work under the high courts. So like for example the family court, etc. Okay, now there are as of now 20 plus state high courts working in all parts of India. Now the Supreme Court, as I said, is the highest court of the land, and it controls and runs the judicial administration in India. The next feature, before we go into this, what makes Indian judiciary independent? Okay, what makes it independent? The judges are appointed by the president. Okay, only persons with high legal qualifications and experience are appointed as judges. Judges of Supreme Court cannot be removed from office except through an extremely difficult process. Okay, if you if you have to remove a particular judge from office, they have to follow a very difficult procedure. This is because they want to protect the integrity of the office of the court, office of the judge. എപ്പോൾ വേണമെങ്കിലും മാറ്റാൻ പറ്റുന്ന ഒരു പോസ്റ്റ് ആണെങ്കിൽ അതിൻ്റെ ക്രെഡിബിലിറ്റീനെ അത് ബാധിക്കും. സോ ദേ ഹാവ് ക്രിയേറ്റഡ് ഇറ്റ് ഇൻ സച്ച് എ മാനർ where the integrity of the judiciary is protected. Now, Supreme Court has its own staff. Indian judiciary has an autonomous organization and status, and Supreme Court in India and all these high courts, this single integrated judicial system that we have in India is a very powerful setup. Okay, next up, judicial review. Not just, so the court is not just independent, it also has certain judicial review powers with it. So we have seen how the constitution is the supreme law of the land. Supreme Court acts as the guardian and protector of this constitution. Okay, now it guarantees fundamental rights of the people. Now for protecting the constitution and for protecting the fundamental rights of the people, it exercises the power of judicial review. Now, what is judicial review? Can somebody tell me what is judicial review? No. So using judicial review, what the court does is to look at the constitutional validity of laws passed by the legislatures. Is this law in accordance with the principles of the constitution, with the structure of the constitution? Now, the court in India holds the power to reject any law which is found to be unconstitutional. If a particular law is found to be unconstitutional, then immediately the court can strike it down and say that this is null and void because this does not keep up with the spirit of the constitution. We have exercised our review powers and examined it, and we have come to the conclusion that this is entirely invalid. Up next, So we have already discussed fundamental rights and fundamental duties. All of them have been mentioned in the part 3 of the Constitution. We have already discussed the fundamental rights and the fundamental duties. Now we will go on to the directive principles of state policy. This I mentioned earlier is borrowed from the Irish Constitution and is mentioned in part 3 of the Constitution again, article 36 to 51. Now again, this is not something which is, the governments are not legally bound by the directive principles of state policy as they are by fundamental rights, okay, but these are certain principles which the governments are expected to keep in mind while framing laws and policies. Secularism, okay. Now India is a secular state, which means it detaches itself from religious dogmas. No religion gets any kind of special status or special privilege in India. Similarly, in India you have a single citizenship, which means if you are a citizen of India, you cannot be a citizen of any other state, any other country. And similarly, even if you are a Malayali and you are from Kerala, right, but you don't have a separate citizenship for Kerala, you are still an Indian citizen. So there is no separate citizenship for the states and no separate citizenship for the union. You have a single citizenship in India. Oh, this was supposed to be discussed with parliamentary democracy. You know that India has a bicameral legislatures. We have 2 houses of the parliament, the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. Our constitution provides for universal adult franchise, okay, which means anyone above the age of 18, if they are of sound mind, then they can exercise their right to vote. In this matter, we have taken a very progressive stand compared to several other countries of the world, even places like United States, which allowed for who enfranchised women in that country much later, much later. So in India, as soon as we got freedom, from day one, women have the right to vote. Earlier I mentioned that in India we don't have any special special status accorded to any religion. At the same time, we have also created provisions for the protection of minorities. The Constitution also provides for certain emergency powers. So, whenever there is emergency, could be of different kind. It could be an internal emergency, it could be an external emergency, it could even be a financial emergency, and the Constitution has laid out in detail the different emergency provisions and the steps to be followed in such conditions. So that's it. These are roughly the most important features of the Constitution. I haven't gone into detail into some of the sections because we will take separate classes for each of them. But if an essay question comes asking you to list the different features of the Constitution, these are the things that you have to look into. I've already sent a PowerPoint home, so please go back and read and get back to me if there are any doubts. Okay, thank you.